for the delay. Where are we at? Interesting. Lost my spot. Okay. We're good. Make sure the bars are working. Hopefully I'm clear. That's off, that's off, that's on. Okay. So hopefully, let's see, question 2. Get through 4 or 5 chapters on question 2. Just a short read today. Hey Ree, you ready? Question 2. Introduction, wherein is set forth the difficulty of this question. Is it lawful to remove witchcraft by means of further witchcraft, or by any other forbidden means? It is argued that it is not, for it has already been shown that in the second book of sentences and the 8th distinction, all the doctors agree that it is unlawful to use the help of devils, since to do so involves apostasy from the faith. And it is argued no witchcraft can be removed without the help of devils, for it is submitted that it must be cured either by human power or by diabolic, or by divine power. It cannot be by the first, for the lower power cannot counteract the higher, having no control over that which is outside its own natural capacity. Neither can it be by divine power, for this would be a miracle, which God performs only at his own will, and not at the instance of men. For when his mother besought Christ to perform a miracle to supply the need for wine, he answered, "Woman, what have I to do with thee?" And the doctors explain this as meaning, what association is there between you and me in the working of a miracle? Also it appears that it is very rarely that men are delivered from a bewitchment by calling on God's help or the prayers of the saints. Therefore it follows that they can only be delivered by the help of devils, and it is unlawful to seek such help. Again, it is pointed out that the common method in practice of taking off a bewitchment, although it is quite unlawful, is for the bewitched persons to resort to wise women, by whom they are frequently cured, and not by priests or exorcists. So experience shows that such curses are effected by the help of devils, which it is unlawful to seek. Therefore it cannot be lawful thus to cure a bewitchment, but it must be patiently borne. It is further argued that St. Thomas and St. Bonaventura, in Book 4, Distinction 34, have said that a bewitchment must be permanent, because it can have no human remedy. For if there is a remedy, it is either unknown to men or unlawful. And these words are taken to mean that this infirmity is incurable and must be regarded as permanent. And they add that even if God should provide a remedy by coercing the devil, and the devil should remove his plague from a man, and the man should be cured, that cure would not be a human one. Therefore, unless God should cure it, it is not lawful for a man to himself to try in any way to look for a cure. In the same place, these two doctors add that it is unlawful even to seek a remedy by the super-adding of another bewitchment. For they say that, granting this to be possible, and that the original spell be removed, yet the witchcraft is none the less to be considered permanent. For it is in no way lawful to invoke the devil's help through witchcraft. Further, it is submitted that the exorcisms of the Church are not always effective in the repression of devils in the matter of bodily afflictions, since such are cured only at the discretion of God. But they are effective always against those molestations of devils against which they are chiefly instituted, as, for example, against men who are possessed, or in the matter of exorcising children. Again, it does not follow that, because the devil has been given power over someone on account of his sins, that power must come to an end on the cessation of the sin. For very often a man may cease from sinning, but his sins still remain. So it seems from these sayings that the two doctors we have cited were of the opinion that it is unlawful to remove a bewitchment, but that it must be suffered, just as it is permitted by the Lord God, who can remove it when it seems good to him. Against this opinion, it is argued that just as God and nature do not abound in superfluities, so also they are not deficient in necessities, and it is necessity that there should be given to the faithful against such devil's work not only a means of protection, of which we treat in the beginning of the second part, but also curative remedies, for otherwise the faithful would not be sufficiently provided for by God, and the works of the devil would seem to be stronger than God's work. Also, there is the gloss on that text in Job. There is no power on earth, etc. The gloss says that although the devil has power over all things human, he is nevertheless subject to the merits of the saints, and even to the merits of saintly men in this life. Again, St. Augustine, De Moribus Ecclesiae, says, no angel is more powerful than our mind when we hold fast to God. For if power is a virtue in this world, then the mind that keeps close to God is more sublime than the whole world. Therefore such minds can undo the works of the devil. Answer. Here are two weighty opinions which, it seems, are at complete variance with each other. For there are certain theologians and canonists who agree that it is lawful to remove witchcraft even by superstitious and vain means, and of this opinion are Duns Scotus, Henry of Segusio, and Godfrey, and all the canonists, but it is the opinion of the other theologians, especially the ancient ones, and of some of the modern ones, such as St. Thomas, St. Bonaventura, Blessed Albert, Peter Palude, and many others, that in no case must evil be done that good may result, and that a man ought rather to die than consent to be cured by superstitious and vain means. Let us now examine their opinions with a view to bringing them as far as possible into agreement. Scotus, in his fourth book, Distinction 34, on the obstructions and impotence caused by witchcraft, says that it is foolish to maintain that it is unlawful to remove a bewitchment, even by superstitious and vain means, and that to do so is in no way contrary to the faith. For he who destroys the work of the devil is not an accessory to such works, but believes that the devil has the power and inclination to help in the infliction of an injury, only so long as the outward token or sign of that injury endures. Therefore, when that token is destroyed, he puts an end to the injury. And he adds that it is meritorious to destroy the works of the devil, but as he speaks of tokens, we will give an example. There are women who discover a witch by the following token. When a cow's supply of milk has been diminished by witchcraft, they hang a pail of milk over the fire and utter certain superstitious words, beat the pail with a stick. And though it is the pail that the woman beat, yet the devil carries all those blows to the back of the witch, and in this way both the witch and the devil are made wary. But the devil does this in order that he may lead on the woman who beats the pail to worse practices, and so, if it were not for the risk which it entails, there would be no difficulty in accepting the opinion of this learned doctor. Many other examples could be given. Henry of Segusio, in his eloquent Summa on the genital impotence caused by witchcraft, says that in such cases recourse must be had to the remedies of physicians, and although some of these remedies seem to be vain and superstitious cantrips and charms, yet every one must be trusted in his own profession, and the Church may well tolerate the suppression of vanities by means of other vanities. Ubertinus also, in his fourth book, uses these words: a bewitchment can be removed either by prayer or by the same art by which it was inflicted. One moment. Godfrey says in his Summa, a bewitchment cannot always be removed by him who caused it, either because he is dead or because he does not know how to cure it, or because the necessary charm is lost. But if he knows how to effect relief, it is lawful for him to cure it. Our author is speaking against those who said that an obstruction of the carnal act could not be caused by witchcraft, and that it could never be permanent, and therefore did not annul a marriage already contracted. Besides, those who maintain that no spell is permanent were moved by the following reasons. They thought that every bewitchment could be removed either by another magic spell or by the exorcisms of the Church, which are ordained for the suppression of the devil's power, or by true penitence, since the devil has power only over sinners. So in the first respect, they agree with the opinion of the others, namely, that a spell can be removed by superstitious means. But St. Thomas is of the contrary opinion, when he says, if a spell cannot be revoked except by some unlawful means, such as the devil's help or anything of that sort, even if it is known that it can be revoked in that way, it is nevertheless to be considered permanent, for the remedy is not lawful. Of the same opinion are St. Bonaventura, Peter Apelud, Blessed Albert, and all the theologians. For touching briefly on the question of invoking the help of the devil either tacitly or expressly, they seem to hold that such spells may only be removed by lawful exorcism or true penitence, as is set down in the canon law concerning sortilege, being moved, as it seems, by the considerations mentioned in the beginning of this question. But it is expedient to bring these various opinions of the learned doctors as far as possible into agreement, and this can be done in one respect. For this purpose, it is to be noted that the methods by which a spell of witchcraft can be removed are as follows: either by the agency of another witch and another spell, or without the agency of a witch, but by means of magic and unlawful ceremonies. And this last method may be divided into two, namely, the use of ceremonies which are both unlawful and vain, or the use of ceremonies which are vain but not unlawful. The first remedy is altogether unlawful, in respect both of the agent and of the remedy itself, but it may be accomplished in two ways, either with some injury to him who worked the spell, or without an injury, but with magic and unlawful ceremonies. In the latter case it can be included with the second method, namely, that by which the spell is removed not by the agency of a witch, but by magic and unlawful ceremonies, and in this case it is still to be judged unlawful, though not in the same extent as the first method. We may summarize the position as follows. There are three conditions by which a remedy is rendered unlawful. First, when a spell is removed through the agency of another witch, and by further witchcraft, that is, by the power of some devil. Secondly, when it is not removed by a witch, but by some honest person in such a way, however, that the spell is by some magical remedy transferred from one person to another, and this again is unlawful. Thirdly, when the spell is removed without imposing it on another person, but some open or tacit invocation of devils is used, and then again it is unlawful. And it is with reference to these methods that the theologians say that it is better to die than to consent to them. But there are two other methods by which, according to the canonists, it is lawful, or not idle and vain, to remove a spell, and that such methods may be used when all the remedies of the Church, such as exorcisms and the prayers of the saints and true penitence, have been tried and have failed. But for a clear understanding of these remedies, we will recount some examples known to our experience. One moment. Things seem to have frozen up. Okay. Where were we? Yes. In the time of Pope Nicholas, there had come to Rome on some business a certain bishop from Germany, whom it is charitable not to name, although he had now paid the debt of all nature. There he fell in love with a girl, and sent her to his diocese in charge of 2 servants and certain other of his possessions, including some rich jewels, which were indeed very valuable, and began to think in her heart that, if only the bishop were to die through some witchcraft, she would be able to take possession of the rings, the pendants, and the carcanets. The next night the bishop suddenly fell ill, and the physicians and his servants gravely suspected that he had been poisoned, for there was such a fire in his breast that he had to take a continual draughts of cold water to assuage it. On the 3rd day, when there seemed no hope of his life, an old woman came and begged that she might see him. So they let her in, and she promised the bishop that she could heal him if he would agree to her proposals. When the bishop asked what it was to which he had to agree in order to regain his health, as he so greatly desired, the old woman answered, "Your illness has been caused by a spell of witchcraft, and you can only be healed by another spell, which will transfer the illness from you to the witch who caused it, so that she will die." The bishop was astounded, and seeing that he could be healed in no other way, and not wishing to come to a rash decision, decided to ask the advice of the Pope. Now the Holy Father loved him very dearly, and when he learned that he could only be healed by the death of the witch, he agreed to permit the lesser of two evils, and signed this permission with his seal. So the old woman was again approached, and told that both he and the Pope had agreed to the death of the witch, on condition that he was restored to his former health. And the old woman went away, promising him that he would be healed on the following night. And behold, when about the middle of the night he felt himself cured and free from all illness, he sent a messenger to learn what had happened to the girl, and he came back and reported that she had suddenly been taken ill in the middle of the night while sleeping by her mother's side. It is to be understood that at the very same hour and moment the illness left the bishop and afflicted the girl witch through the agency of the old witch, and so the evil spirit, by ceasing to plague the bishop, appeared to restore him to health by chance, whereas it was not he but God who permitted him to afflict him, and it was God who, properly speaking, restored him. And the devil, by reason of his compact with the second witch, who envied the fortune of the girl, has to afflict the bishop's mistress. And it must be thought that those two evil spells were not worked by one devil serving two persons, but by two devils serving two separate witches. For the devils do not work against themselves, but work as much as possible in agreement for the perdition of souls. Chapter 1. The remedies prescribed by the Holy Church against incubus and succubus devils. In the foregoing chapters, on the first question, we have treated of the methods of bewitching men, animals, and the fruits of the earth, and especially of the behavior of witches in their own persons, how they seduce young girls in order to increase their numbers, what is their method of profession and of offering homage, how they offer to devils their own children and the children of others, and how they are transported from place to place. Now I say that there is no remedy for such practices, unless witches be entirely eradicated by the judges, or at least punished as an example to all who may wish to imitate them. But we are not immediately treating of this point, which will be dealt with in the last part of this work, where we set forth the 20 ways of proceeding against and sentencing witches. For the present, we are concerned only with the remedies against the injuries which they inflict. And first, how men who are bewitched can be cured. Secondly, beasts, and thirdly, how the fruits of the earth may be secured from blight or phylloxera. With regard to the bewitchment of human beings by means of incubus and succubus devils, it is to be noted that this can happen in 3 ways. First, when women voluntarily prostitute themselves to incubus devils. Secondly, when men have connection with succubus devils. Yet it does not appear that men thus devilishly fornicate with the same full degree of culpability, for men, being by nature intellectually stronger than women, are more apt to abhor such practices. There is in the town of Koblenz a poor man who is bewitched in this way. In the presence of his wife, he is in the habit of acting after the manner of men with women, that is to say, of practicing coition, as it were, and he continues to do this repeatedly, nor have the cries and urgent appeals of his wife any effect in making him desist. And after he has fornicated thus 2 or 3 times, he bawls out, "We are going to start all over again," when actually there is no person visible to mortal sight lying with him. And after an incredible number of such bouts, the poor man at last sinks to the floor utterly exhausted. When he has recovered his strength a little, and is asked how this happened to him, and whether he has had any women with him, he answers that he saw nothing, but his mind is in some way possessed, so that he can by no means refrain from such priapism. And indeed he harbors a great suspicion that a certain woman bewitched him in this way, because he had offended her, and she had cursed him with threatening words, telling him that she would like to happen to him. But there are no laws or ministers of justice which can proceed to the avenging of so great a crime with no other warrant than a vague charge or a grave suspicion. For it is held that no one ought to be condemned unless he has been convicted by his own confession or by the evidence of 3 trustworthy witnesses, since the mere fact of the crime, coupled with even the gravest suspicions against some person, is not sufficient to warrant the punishment of that person. But this matter will be dealt with later. As for instances where young maidens are molested by incubus devils in this way, it would take too long to mention even those that have been known to happen in our own time, for there are very many well attested stories of such bewitchments. But the great difficulty of finding a remedy for such afflictions can be illustrated from a story told by Thomas of Brabant in his book on bees. I saw, he writes, and heard the confession of a virgin in a religious habit, who said at first that she had never been a consenting party to fornication, but at the same time have been known in this way. This I could not believe, but narrowly charged and exhorted her, with the most solemn adjurations, to speak the truth on peril of her very soul. At last, weeping bitterly, she acknowledged that she had been corrupted rather in the mind than in the body, and that though she had afterwards grieved almost to death, and had daily confessed with tears, yet by no device or study or art could she be delivered from an incubus devil, nor yet by the sign of the cross, nor by holy water, which are specially ordained for the expulsion of devils, nor even by the sacrament of the body of our Lord, which even the angels fear. But at last, after many years of prayer and fasting, she was delivered. It may be believed, saving a better judgment, that after she repented and confessed her sin, the incubus devil should be regarded rather in the light of a punishment for sin than as a sin in itself. A devout nun named Christina in the Low Country of the Duchy of Brabant told me the following concerning this same woman. On the vigil of one Pentecost, the woman came to her complaining that she dared not take the sacrament because of the importunate molestation of a devil. Christina, pitying her, said, "Go and rest assured that you will receive the body of our Lord tomorrow, for I will take your punishment upon myself." So she went away joyfully, and after praying the night slept in peace, and rose up in the morning and communicated in all tranquillity of the soul. But Christina, not thinking of the punishment she had taken upon herself, went to rest in the evening, and as she lay in bed, here, as it were, a violent attack being made upon her, and seizing whatever it was by the throat, tried to throw it off. She lay down again, but it was again molested, and rose up in terror, and this happened many times, whilst all the straw of her bed was turned over and thrown about everywhere, so at length she perceived that she was being persecuted by the malice of a devil. Thereupon she left her pallet and passed a sleepless night, and when she wished to pray, she was so tormented by the devil that she said she had never suffered so much before. In the morning, therefore, saying to the other woman, "I renounce your punishment, and I am hardly alive to renounce it," she escaped from the violence of that wicked tempter. From this it can be seen how difficult it is to cure this sort of evil, whether or not it is due to witchcraft. However, there are still some means by which these devils may be driven away, of which Nider writes in his Formicarius. He says that there are 5 ways by which girls or men can be delivered. First, by sacramental confession. Second, by the sacred sign of the cross, or by the recital of the angelic salutation. Third, by the use of exorcisms. Fourth, by moving to another place. And fifth, by means of excommunication prudently employed by holy men. It is evident from what has been said that the first 2 methods did not avail the nun, but they are not on that account to be neglected. For that which cures one person does not necessarily cure another, and conversely. And it is a recorded fact that incubus devils have often been driven away by the Lord's Prayer, or by the sprinkling of holy water, and also especially by the angelic salutation. For St. Caesarius tells in his dialogue that after a certain priest had hanged himself, his concubine entered a convent, where she was carnally solicited by an incubus. She drove him away by crossing herself and using holy water, yet he immediately returned. But when she recited the angelic salutation, he vanished like an arrow shot from a bow. Still he came back, although he did not dare come near her, because of the Ave Maria. St. Caesarius also refers to the remedy of sacramental confession, for he says that the aforesaid concubine was entirely abandoned by the incubus after she was clean confessed. He tells also of a man in Leyden who was plagued by a succubus and was entirely delivered after sacramental confession. He adds yet another example of an enclosed nun, a contemplative, whom an incubus would not leave in spite of prayers and confession and other religious exercises, for he persisted in forcing his way to her bed. But when acting on the advice of a certain religious man, she uttered the word benedicite. The devil at once left her. On the fourth method, that of moving to another place, he says that a certain priest's daughter had been defiled by an incubus and driven frantic with grief. But when she went away across the Rhine, she was left in peace by the incubus. Her father, however, because he had sent her away, was so afflicted by the devil that he died within 3 days. He also maintains a woman who was often molested by an incubus in her own bed and asked a devout friend of hers to come and sleep with her. She did so, and was troubled all night with the utmost uneasiness and disquiet. And then the first woman was left in peace. William of Paris notes also that the incubus seemed chiefly to molest women and girls with beautiful hair, either because they devote themselves too much to the care and adornment of their hair, or because they are boastfully vain about it, or because God in his goodness permits this, so that women may be afraid to entice men by the very means by which the devils wish them to entice men. The fifth method, that of excommunication, which is perhaps the same as exorcism, is exemplified in a history of St. Bernard. In Aquitaine, a woman had for 6 years been molested by an incubus, with incredible carnal abuse and lechery. And she heard the incubus threaten her that she must not go near the holy man who was coming that way, saying, "It will avail you nothing, for when he was gone away, I, who have till now been your lover, will become the cruelest of tyrants to you." Nonetheless, she went to St. Bernard, and he said to her, "Take my staff and set it in your bed, and may the devil do what he can." When she had done this, the devil did not dare to enter the woman's room, but threatened her terribly from outside, saying that he would persecute her when St. Bernard had gone away. When St. Bernard heard this from the woman, he called the people together, bidding them carry lighted candles in their hands, and, with whole assembly which was gathered, excommunicated the devil, forbidding him evermore to approach that woman or any other, and so she was delivered from that punishment. Here it is to be noted that the power of the keys granted to St. Peter and his successors, which resounds on the earth, is really a power of healing granted to the Church on behalf of travelers who are subject to the jurisdiction of the papal power. Therefore, it seems wonderful that even the powers of the air can be warded off by this virtue. But it must be remembered that persons who are molested by devils are under the jurisdiction of the Pope and his keys, and therefore it is not surprising if such powers are indirectly kept at bay by the virtue of the keys, just as by the same virtue the souls in purgatory can indirectly be delivered from the pains of fire, inasmuch as this power availeth upon the earth, aye, and to the relief of souls that are under the earth. But it is not seemly to discuss the power of the keys granted to the head of the Church as Christ's vicar, since it is known that, for the use of the Church, Christ granted to the Church and his vicar as much power as it is possible for God to grant to mere man. And it is piously to be believed that when infirmities inflicted by witches through the power of devils, together with witches and devils themselves, are excommunicated, those who were afflicted will no longer be tormented, and that they will be delivered all the sooner by the use of other lawful exorcisms in addition. There is a common report current in the districts of the river Etch, as also in other places, that by the permission of God a swarm of locusts came and devoured all the vines, green leaves, and crops, and that they were suddenly put to flight and dispersed by means of this kind of excommunication and cursing. Now, if any wish that this should be ascribed to some holy man, and not to the virtue of the keys, let it be so, in the name of the Lord. But of one thing we are certain, that both the power to perform miracles and the power of the keys necessarily presuppose a condition of grace in him who performs that act of grace, since both these powers proceed from the grace granted to men who are in a state of grace. Again, it is to be noted that if none of the aforesaid remedies are of any avail, then recourse must be had to the usual exorcisms, of which we shall treat later. And if even these are not sufficient to banish the iniquity of the devil, then the affliction must be considered to be an expiatory punishment for sin, which should be borne in all meekness, as are other ills of this sort, which oppress us, that they may, as it were, drive us to seek God. But it must also be remarked that sometimes persons only think they are molested by an incubus, when they are not so actually, and this is more apt to be the case with women than with men, for they are more timid and liable to imagine extraordinary things. In this connection, William of Paris is often quoted. He says many fantastical apparitions occur to persons suffering from a melancholy disease, especially to women, as is shown by their dreams and visions. And the reason for this, as physicians know, is that women's souls are by nature far more easily and lightly impressionable than men's souls. And he adds, I know that I have seen a woman who thought that a devil copulated with her from inside and said she was physically conscious of such incredible things. At times also women think they have been made pregnant by an incubus, and their bellies grow to an enormous size. But when the time of parturition comes, their swelling is relieved by no more than the expulsion of a great quantity of wind. For by taking ants' eggs in drink, or the seeds of spurge, or of the black pine, an incredible amount of wind and flatulence is generated in the human stomach. And it is very easy for the devil to cause these and even greater disorders in the stomach. This has been set down in order that too easy credence should not be given to women, but only to those whose experience has shown to be trustworthy, and to those who by sleeping in their beds or near them know for a fact that such things as we have spoken of are true. Get out of there. Cat problems. A little more. Chapter 2. Remedies prescribed for those who are bewitched by the limitation of the generative power. Although far more women are witches than men, as was shown in the first part of the work, yet men are more often bewitched than women, and the reason for this lies in the fact that God allows the devil more power over the venereal act, by which the original sin is handed down, than over other human actions. In the same way he allows more witchcraft to be performed by means of serpents, which are more subject to incantations than other animals, because that was the first instrument of the devil. And the venereal act can be more readily and easily bewitched in a man than in a woman, as has been clearly shown, for there are 5 ways in which the devil can impede the act of generation, and they are more easily operated against men. As far as possible, we shall set out the remedies which can be applied in each separate kind of obstruction, and let him who is bewitched in this faculty take note to which class of obstruction he belongs, for there are 5 classes according to Peter Epelude, in his 4th book, Distinction 34 of the trial of this sort of bewitchment. For the devil, being a spirit, has by his very nature power, with God's permission, over a bodily creature, especially to promote or to prevent locomotion. So by this power they can prevent the bodies of men and women from approaching each other, and this either directly or indirectly. Directly, when they remove one to a distance from another, and do not allow him to approach the other. Indirectly, when they cause some obstruction, or when they interpose themselves in an assumed body. So it happened that a young pagan, who had married an idol, but none the less contracted a marriage with the girl, but because of this he was unable to copulate with her, as has been shown above. Secondly, the devil can inflame a man towards one woman, and render him impotent towards another, and this he can secretly cause by the application of certain herbs, or other matters of which he well knows the virtue for this purpose. Thirdly, he can disturb the apperception of a man or a woman, so that he makes one appear hideous to the other, for as has been shown, he can influence the imagination. Fourthly, he can suppress the vigor of that member which is necessary for procreation, just as he can deprive any organ of the power of local motion. Fifthly, he can prevent the flow of semen to the members in which is the motive power, by as it were closing the seminal duct, so that it does not descend to the genital vessels, or does not ascend again from them, or cannot come forth, or is spent vainly. But if a man should say, I do not know by which of these different methods I have been bewitched, all I know is that I cannot do anything with my wife, he should be answered in this way. If he is active and able with regard to other women, but not with his wife, then he is bewitched in the second way. For he can be certified as to the first way, that he is being deluded by succubus or incubus devils. Moreover, if he does not find his wife repellent, and yet cannot know her, but can know other women, then again it is the second way. But if he finds her repellent and cannot copulate with her, then it is the second and the third way. If he does not find her repellent and wishes to have connection with her, but has no power in his member, then it is the fourth way. But if he has power in his member, yet cannot emit his semen, then it is the fifth way. The method of curing these will be shown where we consider whether those who live in grace and those who do not are equally liable to be bewitched in these manners. And we answer that they are not, with the exception of the fourth manner, and even then very rarely. For such an affliction can happen to a man living in grace and righteousness. But the reader must understand that in this case we speak of the conjugal act between married people, for in any other case they are all liable to bewitchment. For every venereal act outside wedlock is a mortal sin, and is only committed by those who are not in a state of grace. We have indeed the authority of the whole of scriptural teaching that God allows the devil to afflict sinners more than the just. For although that most just man, Job, was stricken, yet he was not so particularly or directly in respect of the procreant function. And it may be said that when a married couple are afflicted in this way, either both the parties or one of them is not living in a state of grace. And this opinion is substantiated in the Scriptures, both by authority and by reason. For the angel said to Tobias, the devil receives power against those who are given over to lust, and he proved it in the slaying of 7 of the husbands of the Virgin Sarah. Cassian, in his collation of the Fathers, quotes St. Anthony as saying that the devil can in no way enter our mind or body unless he has first deprived it of all holy thoughts and made it empty and bare of spiritual contemplation. These words should not be applied to an evil affliction over the whole of the body, for when Job was so afflicted, he was not denuded of divine grace, but they have particular reference to a particular infirmity inflicted upon the body for some sin. And the infirmity we are considering can only be due to the sin of incontinence. For as we have said, God allows the devil more power over that act than over the other human acts because of its natural nastiness, and because by it the first sin was handed down to posterity. Therefore, when people joined in matrimony have for some sin been deprived of divine help, God allows them to be bewitched, chiefly in their procreant functions. But if it is asked, of what sort are those sins, it can be said, according to St. Jerome, that even in a state of matrimony it is possible to commit the sin of incontinence in various ways. See the text. He who loves his wife to excess is an adulterer, and they who love in this way are more liable to be bewitched after the manner we have said. The remedies of the Church then are twofold, one applicable in the public court, the other in the tribunal of the confessional. As for the first, when it has been publicly found that the impotence is due to witchcraft, then it must be distinguished whether it is a temporary or permanent. If it is only temporary, it does not annul the marriage, and it is assumed to be temporary if, within the space of 3 years, by using every possible expedient of the sacraments of the Church and other remedies, a cure can be caused. But after that time, they cannot be cured by any remedy, then it is assumed to be permanent. Now, the disability either precedes both the contract and the consummation of marriage, and in this case it impedes the contract. Or it follows, the contract but precedes the consummation, and in this case it annuls the contract. For men are very often bewitched in this way, because they have cast off their former mistresses, who, hoping that they were to be married and being disappointed, so bewitch the men that they cannot copulate with another woman. And in such a case, according to the opinion of many, the marriage already contracted is annulled, unless, like our Blessed Lady and Saint Joseph, they are willing to live together in holy continence. This opinion is supported by the canon, where it says that a marriage is confirmed by the carnal act, and a little later it says that impotence before such confirmation dissolves the ties of marriage. Or else the disability follows the consummation of a marriage, and then it does not dissolve the bonds of matrimony. Much more to this effect is noted by the doctors, where in various writings they treat of the obstruction due to witchcraft, but since it is not precisely relevant to the present inquiry, it is here omitted. But some may find it difficult to understand how this function can be obstructed in respect of one woman, but not of another. St. Bonaventura answers that this may be because some witch has persuaded the devil to effect this only with respect to one woman, or because God will not allow the obstruction to apply, save to some particular woman. The judgment of God in this matter is a mystery, as in the case of the wife of Tobias. But how the devil procures this disability is plainly shown by what has already been said, and St. Bonaventura says that he obstructs the procreant function not intrinsically by harming the organ, but extrinsically by impeding its use. It is an artificial, not a natural impediment. And so he can cause it to apply to one woman and not to another, or else he takes away all desire for one or another woman, and this he does by his own power, or else by the means of some herb or stone or some occult creature, and in this he is in substantial agreement with Peter a Palude. The ecclesiastical remedy in the tribunal of God is set forth in the canon, where it says, if with the permission of the just and secret judgment of God, through the arts of sorceresses and witches, and the preparation of the devil, men are bewitched in their procreant function, they are to be urged to make clean confession to God and his priest of all their sins, with a contrite heart and a humble spirit, and to make satisfaction to God with many tears and large offerings and prayers and fasting. From these words it is clear that such afflictions are only on account of sin, and occur only to those who do not live in a state of grace. It proceeds to tell how the ministers of the Church can effect a cure by means of exorcisms and the other protections and cures provided by the Church. In this way, with the help of God, Abraham cured by his prayers Abimelech and his house. In conclusion, we may say that there are 5 remedies which may lawfully be applied to those who are bewitched in this way, namely, a pilgrimage to some holy and venerable shrine, true confession of their sins with contrition, the plentiful use of the sign of the cross and devout prayer, lawful exorcism by solemn words, the nature of which will be explained later, and lastly, a remedy can be effected by prudently approaching the witch, as was shown in the case of the Count, who for 3 years was unable to cohabit carnally with a virgin whom he had married. Chapter 3. Remedies prescribed for those who are bewitched by being inflamed with inordinate love or extraordinary hatred. Just as the generative faculty can be bewitched, so can inordinate love or hatred be caused in the human mind. First, we shall consider the cause of this, and then, as far as possible, the remedies. Philocaption, or inordinate love of one person for another, can be caused in 3 ways. Sometimes it is due merely to a lack of control over the eyes, sometimes to the temptation of devils, sometimes to the spells of necromancers and witches with the help of devils. The first is spoken in St. James. Every man is tempted by his own concupiscence, being drawn away and allured. Then with concupiscence hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin. But sin, when it is completed, begetteth death. And so, when Shechem saw Dinah going out to see the daughters of the land, he loved her, and ravished her, and lay with her, and his soul clave unto her. Genesis 34. And here the gloss says that this happened to an infirm spirit, because she left her own concerns to inquire into those of other people, and such a soul is seduced by bad habits, and is led to consent to unlawful practices. The second cause arises from the temptations of devils. In this way, Amnon loved his beautiful sister Tamar, and was so vexed that he fell sick for love of her. For he could not have been so totally corrupt in his mind as to fall into so great a crime of incest, unless he had been grievously tempted by the devil. The Book of Holy Fathers refers to this kind of love, where it says that even in their hermitages they were exposed to every temptation, including that of carnal desires, for some of them were at times tempted with the love of women more than it is possible to believe. St. Paul also, in 2 Corinthians 12, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, the messenger of Satan to buffet me. And the gloss explains this as referring to the temptation of lust. But it is said that when a man does not give way to temptation, he does not sin, but it is an exercise for his virtue. But this is to be understood of the temptation of the devil, not of that of the flesh, for this is a venial sin, even if a man does not yield to it. Many examples of this are to be read. As for the third cause, by which inordinate love proceeds from devils' and witches' works, the possibility of this sort of witchcraft has been exhaustively considered in the questions of the first part, as to whether devils, through the agency of witches, can turn the minds of men to inordinate love or hatred, and it was proved by examples which had fallen within our own experience. Indeed, this is the best known and most general form of witchcraft. But the following question may be asked. Peter has been seized with an inordinate love of this description, but he does not know whether it is due to the first or the second or the third cause. It must be answered that it can be by the work of the devil that hatred is stirred up between married people, so as to cause the crime of adultery. But when a man is so bound in the meshes of carnal lust and desire that he can be made to desist from it by no shame, words, blows, or actions, and when a man often puts away his beautiful wife to cleave to the most hideous of women, and when he cannot rest in the night, but is so demented that he must go by devious ways to his mistress, and when it is found that those of noblest birth, governors, and other rich men are the most miserably involved in this sin, for this age is dominated by women, and was foretold by St. Hildegard, as Vincent of Beauvais records in the Mirror of History, especially among the most highly born. Although he said it would not endure for as long as it already has, and when the world is now full of adultery, especially among the most highly born. When all this is considered, I say, of what use is it to speak of remedies to those who desire no remedy? Nevertheless, for the satisfaction of the pious reader, we will set down briefly some of the remedies for philication when it is not due to witchcraft. Avicenna mentions 7 remedies which may be used when a man is made physically ill by this sort of love. But they are hardly relevant to our inquiry, except in so far as they may be of service to the sickness of the soul. For he says in Book 3 that the root of sickness may be discovered by feeling the pulse and uttering the name of the object of the patient's love, and then, if the law permits, he may be cured by yielding to nature, or certain medicines may be applied, concerning which he gives instructions. Or the sick man may be turned from his love by lawful remedies, which will cause him to direct his love to a more worthy object. Or he may avoid her presence and so distract his mind from her. Or, if he is open to correction, he may be admonished and expostulated with, to the effect that such love is the greatest misery. Or he may be directed to someone who, as far as he may with God's truth, will vilify the body and disposition of his love, and so blacken her character that she may appear to him altogether base and deformed. Or finally, he is to be set to arduous duties which may distract his thoughts. Indeed, just as the animal nature of man may be cured by such remedies, so may they all be of use in reforming his inner spirit. Let a man obey the law of his intellect rather than that of nature. Let him turn to his love to safe pleasures. Let him remember how momentary is the fruition of lust, and how eternal the punishment. Let him seek his pleasure in that life where joys begin never to end, and let him consider that if he cleaves to this earthly love, that will be his sole reward, but he will lose the bliss of heaven, and be condemned to eternal fire. Behold, the three irrevocable losses which proceed from inordinate lust. With regard to philocaction caused by witchcraft, the remedies detailed in the preceding chapter may not inconveniently be applied here also, especially the exorcisms by sacred words which the bewitched person can himself use. Let him daily invoke the guardian angel deputed to him by God. Let him use confession and frequent the shrines of the saints, especially of the Blessed Virgin, and without doubt he will be delivered. But how abject are those strong men who, discarding their natural gifts and the armor of virtue, cease to defend themselves, whereas the girls themselves, in this their invincible frailty, use those very rejected weapons to repel this kind of witchcraft. We give one out of many examples in their praise. There was in a country village near Lindau, in the Diocese of Constance, a grown maid, fair to see, of even more elegant behavior, at sight of whom a certain man of loose principles, a cleric in sooth, but not a priest, was smitten with violent pangs of love, and being unable to conceal the wound in his heart any longer, he went to the place where the girl was working, and with fair words showed that he was in the net of the devil, beginning by venturing in words only to persuade the girl to grant him her love. She, perceiving by divine instinct his meaning, and being chaste in mind and body, bravely answered him, Master, do not come to my house with such words, for modesty itself forbids. To this he replied, Although you will not be persuaded by gentle words to love me, yet I promise you that soon you will be compelled by my deeds to love me. Now that man was a suspected enchanter and wizard. The maiden considered his words as but empty air, and until then felt in herself no spark of carnal love for him. But after a short time she began to have amorous thoughts. Perceiving this, and being inspired by God, she sought the protection of the Mother of Mercy, and devoutly implored her to intercede with her son to help her. Anxious, moreover, she went on a pilgrimage to a hermitage, where there was a church miraculously consecrated in that diocese to the Mother of God. There she confessed her sins, so that no evil spirit could enter her, and after her prayers to the Mother of Pity, all the devil's machinations against her ceased, so that these evil crafts thenceforth never afflicted her. Nonetheless, there are still some strong men cruelly enticed by witches to this sort of love, so that it would seem that they could never restrain themselves from their inordinate lust for them. Yet these often most manfully resist the temptation of lewd and filthy enticements, and by the aforesaid defenses overcome all the wiles of the devil. A rich young man in the town of Innsbruck provides us with a notable pattern of this sort of struggle. He was so importuned by witches that it is hardly possible for pen to describe his strivings, but he always kept a brave heart and escaped by means of the remedies we have mentioned. Therefore, it may justly be concluded that these remedies are infallible against this disease, and that they who use such weapons will most surely be delivered. And it must be understood that what we have said concerning inordinate love applies also to inordinate hatred, since the same discipline is of benefit for the two opposite extremes. But though the degree of witchcraft is equal in each, yet there is this difference in the case of hatred. The person who is hated must seek another remedy. For the man who hates his wife and puts her out of his heart will not easily, if he is an adulterer, be turned back again to his wife, even though he go on many a pilgrimage. Now it has been learned from witches that they cause this spell of hatred by means of serpents. For the serpent was the first instrument of the devil, and by reason of its curse inherits a hatred of women. Therefore, they cause such spells by placing the skin or head of a serpent under the threshold of a room or house. For this reason, all the nooks and corners of the house where such a woman lives are to be closely examined and reconstructed as far as possible, or else she must be lodged in the houses of others. And when it is said that the bewitched men can exercise themselves, it is to be understood that they can wear the sacred words of benedictions, of incantations round their necks, if they are unable to read or pronounce the benedictions, but it will be shown later in what way this should be done. Alright, we'll end there for now. Small intermission and then back for some games. Darby.